In this tutorial we are going to see how macros are edited. Let's open a generic workspace. Is it important that Notepad is already open on desktop before opening workspace? Let's edit any macro. For example, we are going to modify maximize application. Here we have the possibility with the menu to modify the macro. Duplicate a macro. Edit the assigned voice command to apply this macro with the voice command. Make it visible on the tablet. Protect the macro. Unprotect the macro. Delete the macro. Add the macro to the favorites panel. Add the macro to the transport keys. Let us now edit the macro. This is the macro name in full, just as the macro file name will be. This is the label that is applied to the button. If for example I just want the icon and I don't want labels, I leave the space blank. When I edit, I can see a preview of what the button will look like. Here I can manage the height and width of the macro. Here I can assign an icon. Here I can remove an assigned icon. Here I can go to change the style of the button associated with the macro. This checkbox means that at the end of the macro execution, the mouse must return to the position in which the macro was launched. But there are cases where this option must be disabled, as we may wish to leave the mouse in another position. You see that automatically creating a mouse macro, that option is disabled to prevent the mouse from returning to the position in which the macro is launched. Note that by enabling this option, at the end of the macro the pointer returns to the point where the macro started. Normally, Magic Automa, before running a macro, checks if the application to be controlled is active. If the application is active, then the macro is executed. If it is not active, it is reported that the application is not active. If this option is activated before running the macro, there is no check as to whether the target application is active, and the macro will always be run. The Minimize Magic Automa option during macro execution must be active, especially when the application of the macro could interfere with the main window of the Magic Automaton. Normally this option is disabled. Let's try. You saw it was very fast. Before executing the macro, the main window is minimized, and after applying the macro, the window is brought to the foreground. Here we have the spoken word required to apply the macro with the voice command. If we delete this word, the macro will no longer be usable via voice commands. To apply this macro with a voice command, just enter a value. Here the value is maximize app, and the macro is launched with that associated word. We can assign a keyboard shortcut to each macro, and it is handled here. For example, we assign the F4 key to this macro. Once selected and applied, the macro can be recalled by pressing F4 on the keyboard. If I move the mouse over the macro, I am also notified that the F4 key is assigned to that macro and also a voice command. Let's try. Once I'm on the notepad, I press F4, we see that the macro will be executed. So this macro will run just by hitting F4. I can also undo this association with this hotkey. And you see that it is no longer assigned now. Here we have a list of the various possibilities that we can assign function keys. Are all combinations of function keys with Shift, Control and Alt. The light ones are unassigned hotkeys and the dark blue ones are the ones already assigned. Here we can try the macro. Here we can undo the latest changes. Here we can go to modify the commands that make up the macro. Here we apply and store all the latest changes. Click on Edit to see how the section that manages the rows of which the macro is composed is constructed. For each line we have a command, and we can have infinite commands in sequence. We have modify, delete, duplicate. Here we can select an application other than the target one to apply the command on an application other than the target one. If for example the workspace is dedicated to Notepad and I want to apply a macro to another application other than the Notepad, I do it here. Here we can reset the target application if different. Here we go to create a new row. I select the command and go to insert another line. Here I am going to modify the pause between the lines. Here I am going to change the order of the rows by moving the selected row up and down. Here I try the macro. Here I exit the macro. For editing and macro features we are done. Thank you.